This letter is the letter that the Rebbe sent for the Oholei Torah dinner in Tav Shem Lamed Zayin, 1977. And the Rebbe, in this letter, the Rebbe brings out a unique perspective on the different elements and components of Chinuch of a child and how they all come together and the interplay between them to ensure a maximum and most productive Chinuch for the child. So, the Rebbe begins, as usual, with the beginning of the letter acknowledging the Eibishter. I'm going to be reading the English translation of the letter, by the grace of God. Erev Shabbos Mevarchem Iyar, 5737, Brooklyn, New York. The Rebbe addresses the letter to all participants in the annual dinner for Oholei Torah. God bless you all. Now the Rebbe begins by acknowledging, as usual, the notification of the dinner. Greeting and blessing. I was pleased to be informed about the forthcoming dinner on the first day of the week of Acharei Kedoshim. May God grant that it should be with much hatzlacha in every respect. Now the Rebbe moves to the, I want to call it the Dvar Torah part of the letter, which is going to carry us into where the Rebbe brings out a particular message for the participants of the dinner and how their behavior and support will affect the chinuch of the children learning in Oholei Torah. First, the Rebbe turns to the parsha of the week and says as follows. As is well known, the weekly Torah portion contains teachings of our Torah's Chaim, our practical guide in life, which are relevant to all happenings in that week, especially events that are directly connected with Torah. So the Rebbe is saying, if we want to know what message we should take for the dinner, what message we should take for Oholei Torah b'chlal and chinuch in general, so we have to look at Torah, and the parsha of the week that the dinner is happening in has a particular lesson for the dinner that's happening in that week. The Rebbe begins by analyzing the beginning of the parsha, the Seder of Acharei. At first glance, it seems strange that the Seder of Acharei begins with details concerning the Avodah, the service of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, which occurs only once a year. All the more so considering that these instructions were given in the month of Nisan, 6 months before they had to be actually implemented, while those relating to the everyday life and conduct of the Kohanim follow later in the Seder Emer, speak to the Kohanim. So before we go and discuss what the Rebbe's question is, let's give a little bit of background, a little bit of context to this point. The Seder of Acharei is the 6th parsha in Chumash Vayikra. Chumash Vayikra, if we follow the Seder, the order of events that happened up until then, so we had in Chumash Shmois, he had the Yidden left Mitzrayim, there's Kriyas Yamsuf, Matan Torah, the Yidden got a lot of mitzvahs. Then there was the Chet HaEgel, and Moshe Rabbeinu davens for the Yidden, gets them Hashem to forgive the Yidden, brings down the Luchais. The Yidden are commanded to build a Mishkan, and then the Yidden actually go ahead and build the Mishkan. Now, after the Yidden finished completing the Mishkan, which we know from Chazal was on Chafei Kislev, the Eibishter told Moshe Rabbeinu that there's going to be a special induction, inauguration process for the Mishkan and the Kohanim, in which the Mishkan is going to become Heilig, it's going to become holy, it's going to become sanctified, to become a place where the Shekhinah is going to rest. And at the same time, the Kohanim are going to go through their induction process, which is going to make them become Heilig, become Kohanim. Because remember, before the Mishkan was built, the Becher, the firstborn of every family, was the Kohen of the family, the one who brought correspondence on behalf of the family, the one who did the Avodah for the family. Now it's shifting from the Becher to the Kohanim, the Aaron's family, and they're going through a special process which is going to make them Kohanim. So the end of Chumash Shmois, we learn about how there were the Shivas Yemei HaMiluim, the 7 days which the Kohanim spent coming inducted into the Avodah, they were coming trained in the Avodah. This was the days from Chav Gimel Adar all the way through the end of Chodesh Adar. Then Chumash Vayikra begins with, at the point of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is the 8th day of the Miluim, that's the day when the Kohanim actually became Kohanim. That's when Aaron HaKohen finally and his sons finally did the Avodah as actual Kohanim. The Shekhinah comes down to rest in the Mishkan, and it's mission accomplished. The Shekhinah is here. The Yidden have the Eibishter living with them in a Beis HaMikdash in the Mishkan of the Midbar. The Kohanim are Kohanim. Now, in the sequence of events, the next natural step is that the Eibusher is going to inform Moshe Rabbeinu what are the special mitzvahs and obligations and responsibilities in the Beis HaMikdash and the Mishkan and with the Kohanim. What do they need to know? What do they have to be careful of? What are their mitzvahs? So the beginning of Chumash Vayikra, it starts off with Avodah of the Karbanis. It tells us the halachas and the dinim of the different Karbanis. Then it moves on to the halachas of different Tum and Tara, which are relevant because now there's a Mishkan. You can't come to the Beis HaMikdash or the Mishkan. When a person is Tameh, he has to go to the mikvah. Different types of Tumah, Tzaras, etc. It also tells us the story of what happened on that day, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, how Nadav and Avihu, the two older sons of Aaron HaKohen, went in with Ketores into the Kodesh HaKadoshim when they weren't told to, and the neshamas left their bodies, and the Kohanim, the remaining Kohanim of Aaron and his family were left in mourning, and all the details that come up in that in Parsha Shmini. And now, Parsha Achrei Mos, which starts off Achrei Mos B'Shnei Bnei Aaron, after the death of the two sons of Aaron HaKohen, Hashem is now talking to Moshe Rabbeinu and informing him what are going to be the mitzvahs that are for Aaron and his sons as Kohanim. In other words, until now we spoke about the mitzvahs that pertain to the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan, Karbanis, Tum and Tara, etc. And now we're moving on to the people, to the Kohanim, and learning what they have to know, what their mitzvahs are, and all the things that come along with that. So the Rebbe is analyzing over here, if we want to look at what does the Torah start with when it starts in Parshas Achrei discussing what do the Kohanim have to know first thing, it starts off with the rear avodah of the Kohen Gadol going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim to offer the Ketores on, well, not just the Ketores, but the other parts of the blood of certain Karbanis on Yom Kippur. So once a year occurrence it's going to happen. And the Rebbe doesn't say this, but if we think about it, it's also not every Kohen. It's only the Kohen Gadol is going to be doing this avodah. So first thing is, the Rebbe says, why are we starting off with the one-off occurrence, which happens once a year, when there's mitzvahs that Kohanim have to know day to day? Kohanim have certain halachas of who they're allowed to marry. Kohanim have to be careful for certain types of tumah. Kohanim have to know about what to do with the avodah, Baal Mum, not going into the Beis HaMikdash while having drunk wine and having ripped clothes, long hair, different things that they have to be aware of on a daily basis. So why is the Torah starting off with the one-off situation and not starting off with the day-to-day that the Kohanim need to know? Second point that Rebbe mentions is, this parsha was said in the month of Nisan. Yom Kippur is not happening for another 6 months in Tishrei. Why is the Torah starting off with something that's not relevant for another 6 months when we have mitzvahs that the Kohanim need to know to do today? They just started the life as a Kohen. They need to know what to do. So if we think about it, it's a very, very, like the Rebbe says, it's strange. It seems strange why the Torah is, the order seems to be completely out of and illogical, completely out of proper seder that there should be here in the parsha. And the Rebbe points out, when do we have the mitzvahs of the Kohanim? In Parshas Emer, which is 2 parshas later. As that's where the Eibusher says, Emer al Kohanim bnei Aaron, speak to them and tell them the nefesh lo yitama ba'amav, they shouldn't become tamei. All those mitzvahs start only later. So why is it that the Torah, when it's starting to tell us the mitzvahs of the Kohanim, it starts with the Kohen Gadol? So here the Rebbe gives us a very, 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 very fascinating insight into the whole nature of the Kedusha of the Kohanim. And the Rebbe continues. One of the explanations of the seemingly strange order is that when the Kohanim were about to be inducted into the affairs of Kahuna, which is of course in the realm of Kedusha holiness, and on a higher level of holiness than that of an ordinary Jew, who is also a member of the kingdom of Kohanim and a holy nation, it was necessary to emphasize that the basis and force of Kedusha derives from the Holy of Holies. In other words, even though the Kohanim are doing their avodah in the regular parts of the Beis HaMikdash on a daily basis, they're not going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Nevertheless, they had to know that their Kedusha, where does it come from? It comes from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And here the Rebbe specifies that we're talking about the Kodesh HaKadoshim on 3 planes. Number 1, in space, which is in the Beis HaMikdash, the physical room called the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which had the highest level of the Shekhinah. We have in time, on Yom Kippur, which is the highest, holiest day of the whole year. And in the soul of the person representing the highest level of holiness in the kingdom of Kohanim and holy nation. The Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol is the holiest person from all of Klal Yisrael. He represents the Kodesh HaKadoshim, as it were, in the neshama of Yidden. So we have the three things of Kodesh HaKadoshim in space, in time, and in the soul. And the Rebbe adds, with all these three elements of Olam, Shana, Nefesh, space, time, and soul, combined and united as explained in Chabad. So I'm not going to go into over here the explanation of Pichsidis, but the idea is that these three aspects, everything is, the whole world, everything in creation has these three elements. It has the time, the space, the time, and the soul, the person. And here we're bringing out that the Kohanim need to know from the get-go, from the very beginning of when they're starting to be Kohanim, that where does their whole Kedusha come from? From the highest level, from Kodesh HaKadoshim in these three levels of space, time, and person. Now the Rebbe carries this over to Chinuch al Taras HaKodesh. Here the Rebbe continues. Herein is also a practical instruction in regard to Chinuch al Taras HaKodesh. For the essence of Chinuch is to provide the Jewish child with the quality of education that also when he grows old, he will not depart from it. It should be an education that will be felt throughout his entire life and will permeate his daily conduct as is expected of one who is a member of the kingdom of Kohanim and holy nation. So first the Rebbe says, what is Chinuch? Chinuch is the idea of Gam Kiyaz Kan Lo Yatzar Mimena. We want to raise a child that even when he grows old, he won't go away from it. In other words, we're looking to set a child up, not that he should just have a certain set of behaviors when he's a child, and when he grows older, he shifts and becomes some other type of person. We want that as a child, we are setting him up for his entire life. That's the idea of chinuch, that's education. And we want that it should be, here the Rebbe makes the Kohanim connection, every Yid is essentially a Kohen. Every Yid is called part of Mamlechas Kohanim, Kodesh, a kingdom of Kohanim and a holy nation. We're all Halik. On a fundamental level, all Yidden are Halik. And therefore, when we're talking about a Jewish child having a chinuch, having an education, we want to educate him to be on the level that's expected as a kohen, as a member of the Jewish nation. Maybe not a kohen in terms of the family of kohen from Aaron a kohen, but the idea of kohen as every yid being a kohen, a dedicated servant of the Eibishter. So where do we tie in these two things together? The kohenim, the actual kohenim, and the kohenim as yidden and children in chinuch. So here continues the Rebbe, in the area of Chinuch too, there are the said three elements. There's the educational institute where the child learns, the period of formative education when the foundation is laid for the whole life, and the teachers and administration who carry out the sacred educational service. These are, so to speak, the three elements of space, time, and soul of Chinuch, which must combine on the highest level of Kedusha to achieve the utmost results. The Rebbe over here says a very, very, very powerful and profound thing. The Rebbe says, when it comes to chinuch, we also have space, time, and person. The space is the school, the maisid, the place where the child is learning. The time is the time of the child's life. Those years when he is young, when we're laying the foundation for his whole life, that's the time. The person is the teacher, the administration, the ones who run the maisid, the one who actually carry out the chinuch. Just like in the case of the Kohanim, the Kohen Gadol is one who's actually implementing the avodah in the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur. So too, the teachers and administration are the ones carrying out the chinuch in the school during the child's formative years, as the Rebbe puts it. And what does the Rebbe say? What's the lesson? Just like by the Kohanim, even though they're regular Kohanim, they're not Kohanim Gedolim. At least not all of them are going to become Kohanim Gedolim. From the very, very beginning, they have to know where does their Kedusha come from, as Kohanim, and that they're holier than all other Yidden because as Kohanim the Eibishter says, V'kidashta, the Kohanim are holy. Where does that come from? From the Kodesh HaKadoshim, from the highest level of Kedusha. So too in Chinuch, the Rebbe says. When we want to get the utmost results out of Chinuch, we want that the Chinuch should be on the highest level. It has to be that it's all three elements, inside the school, the years, and the teachers and administration are all combined on the highest level of Kedusha. And what does this mean? So we're not going to break down here what this looks like on every level, each part, how there are multiple levels, but just to give a little bit of an idea. We'll go back to the parsha where the Rebbe learned the Seirah from. In this space, we mentioned the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Mishnah says that there are 10 levels of Kedusha. There are 10 levels of Kedusha in the world. I'm not going to list all of them, but you have Eretz Yisrael, you have walled cities in Eretz Yisrael, you have Yerushalayim, you have the different sections of the Beis HaMikdash. Then you come to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the highest level of Kedusha. The same thing we have in time. There's Yom Tiv, there's Shabbos, there's Yom Kippur, Shabbos, Shabbos on the highest level. And the same thing by people. We have Yidden B'chlal, our Mamlechas Kenim Kaddish, we're holy, we're separated from all nations of the world. We have Kayanim, we have within Kayanim the Kayan Gadol, the highest level. So too over here, the Rebbe appears to be saying, the Rebbe doesn't explain in exact detail what this looks like. But when we talk about the highest level of Kedusha, the Rebbe is not negating that you could have other forms of Chinuch, which are also Kaddish, also holy. Just like you could have other places that are holy. The Beis HaMikdash in general is a holy place. Yerushalayim is a holy city. Same thing during the year. Yom Tiv is a holy day. It's not Yom Kippur, but it's Yom Tiv. And the same thing, you have people. You have a Kohen, a regular Kohen is holy. Every Yid is holy. Not the Kohen Gadol, maybe. So the Rebbe over here is bringing out that in Chinuch, it's not just enough to have a holy Chinuch, but it needs to be the highest level of Kedusha. The Rebbe wants them to express that you can have different levels of Chinuch. You could have Chinuch HaKosher, you could have Chinuch which is Chulin Al Taras HaKodesh, until you have a level of Chinuch which is Kodesh itself. Meaning, just like to use the analogy that Rebbe is saying, just to explain, when it comes to kosher meat, for example, a person shechs an animal which is kosher and he does a kosher shchita and kashes it and salts it properly, the meat is kosher. Yet, there's nothing inherently holy about the meat other than it was done according to the halacha. It's chulin, it's regular, it's mundane. Then, there's a higher level, which is, in the times of the Mishnah, there were people who were careful to avoid food becoming tameh, even food that was chulin, even food that didn't need to be kept pure, didn't need to be kept tahar. Nevertheless, they kept the chulin al taras hakodesh, the same level of tara, the same level of purity that they would kodesh, that they would karbanis. So they would guard this meat from any sort of impurities, any sort of tumah, that the same way they would care for an actual meat of an actual carbon that was born in the Beis HaMikdash. So it's a much higher level of chulin. Nevertheless, it's still chulin. Essentially, it didn't become a carbon. Essentially, it didn't become holy. It's being treated with the holiness of a carbon, but it itself is still chulin. It's chulin al taras hakodesh. Chulin with the level of purity that is maintained for kodesh. Then there's a higher level, which is kodesh itself. When a person brings a carbon to the Beis HaMikdash, they shecht it, they offer the blood on the mizbeach, and then the kohenim eat from it. Or if it's a shlamim, after burning the parts of mizbeach, then they have the kohenim eat from it, the Baal HaBayis eats from it. Then they're actually eating meat of a carbon. The meat itself is kodesh. So too in Chinuch, the Rebbe says, you have different levels of Chinuch. You have kosher Chinuch. You have Chinuch, which is a level of similar to Chulin, al taras hakodesh, and then you have Chinuch, which is kodesh itself. So you could have different levels of holiness in Chinuch. You could have different levels. Here the Rebbe is bringing out that in order to have the utmost results, in order for the lesson we learn from this parsha is that in the beginning of the child's life, there has to be, all three have to come together on the highest level of Chinuch, Kodesh HaKadosh. And one interesting point that comes out from here is this is even for a child who's not going to make it in life to become a Kohen Gadol. We're talking about the lesson is learned from all Kohenim. Even someone who wasn't going to reach the level of Kohen Gadol, he had to know where his Kedusha comes from. So too every Jewish child, even if you're going to say he's not going to become the Kohen Gadol of his class, nevertheless, he still needs to have that same chinuch. After the Rebbe explained all this, the Rebbe now carries down to understand what is the purpose of the dinner. After explaining all this, the Rebbe says, however, in order to make this kind of chinuch a reality, it requires a collaboration and support of the parents and of the friends of the educational institution. The Rebbe says, this is all very nice, this is very true, and this is the correct way, and this is what we are striving for, what we're aiming for, and this is what Oholei Torah is built for. Yet at the same time, it can't happen by itself. It needs the collaboration, as the Rebbe says, and the support of the parents and the friends of the Moisid to actually bring this to action. And this is the purpose of the annual dinner, says the Rebbe, which takes place once a year, but must lay the groundwork for meeting the needs of the school, both material and spiritual, to enable it to carry out its sacred task in the fullest measure for the maximum good. Here also the Rebbe seems to be referencing the idea, just like Yom Kippur is once a year. In the Yiddish version of the letter, the Rebbe actually writes the same thing. The Rebbe says that the yearly dinner happens achas b'shana, the same terminology used earlier in the letter to describe Yom Kippur. It's once a year. But it provides the basis and foundation for all the activities of the Moisid to be able to be successful. Just like in Kippur, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim is the foundation upon which a child's chinuch is built. The Rebbe ends off with a bracha that may God grant that all that has been said above should find the proper response and the proper expression at the dinner of the Oholei Torah institution, with a corresponding effort by everyone, with joy and gladness of heart. The Rebbe ends off with esteem and blessing for Hatzlacha and good tidings, signed the Rebbe's holy signature.